Every story you hear leaves a lesson behind. This is Story Times. The next generation. Years passed, and the town no longer looked the way it once did. The streets that had known fear now carried confidence. Children walked freely, voices loud with laughter. The basketball court stood strong, no longer abandoned but filled with life and purpose. And though many still spoke the name VDM with respect, he was no longer the center of attention. That was by design. VDM had learned that true leadership wasn't about being seen. It was about building something that could stand without you. So he stepped aside quietly, allowing others to lead while he watched from a distance. The Ruttells had grown far beyond what he imagined. What began as a small group of frightened kids had become a network of young leaders across towns, schools, and communities. They didn't wait for instructions anymore. They acted with confidence, guided by the same courage that once lived in one boy. One afternoon, VDM sat beneath a tree near the old marketplace, the same place where his journey began. Nearby, a group of children stood in a circle arguing softly. One of them, a small boy with nervous eyes, was being mocked by older kids. VDM didn't move, not because he didn't care, but because he wanted to see what would happen. Before fear could settle, a young girl stepped forward, calm, steady. She placed herself between them and said, "That's enough." Others joined her. The bullies hesitated, confused, then backed away. VDM smiled. The fire had spread. Later that evening, the children gathered around him, unaware of the history he carried. One of them asked, "Sir, were you ever scared when you stood up like this?" VDM paused, then nodded. "Every time," he said. "But courage isn't the absence of fear. It's choosing to act despite it." The children listened closely, their eyes filled with understanding. As the sun set, VDM rose and walked away quietly, leaving the laughter behind him. He didn't need applause. He didn't need recognition, because the greatest proof of his success stood right. They're a new generation unafraid to stand. And in that moment, the fearless boy finally understood something he hadn't known before. Courage doesn't belong to one person. It belongs to everyone willing to pass it on. Full circle. Time has a way of softening even the strongest voices. VDM had grown older now, his steps slower, his presence quieter, but his eyes still carried the same calm fire. The world around him had changed, shaped by years of courage, passed from one heart to another. The Ruttells no longer needed a founder. They had become a culture. In schools, children were taught not just how to read and write, but how to speak up. In communities, young leaders rose without fear of being alone. Standing for truth had become normal, no longer rare. And that was VDM's greatest victory. One evening, he was invited to speak at a small gathering. Not a crowd, not cameras, just a few young people sitting in a circle, eager and uncertain, just like he once was. They asked him questions about bravery, leadership, and fear. One boy finally asked, "If you could go back, would you still choose this path?" VDM smiled. He remembered the marketplace, the basketball court, the fire, the arrest, the silence, the sacrifices. "Yes," he said gently, "because even when it was hard, it mattered." As the gathering ended, VDM walked alone through the town. The same streets where fear once lived now carried peace. He stopped at the old marketplace and stood still for a moment. In his mind, he saw a younger version of himself, small, nervous, unsure, taking that first step forward. And he realized something beautiful. That boy didn't disappear. He multiplied. VDM turned and continued walking, disappearing into the evening light, his work complete, not because the world was perfect, but because it no longer depended on him to be brave. Courage had learned to live on its own, and somewhere, in a quiet corner of the world, another child would take a step forward, just like he once did. The end. Moral of the story: one voice can start a movement, but true courage is when the movement no longer needs the voice.
Thank you for spending this moment with Story Times. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more meaningful stories. Until next time, remember, every story teaches a lesson,